How do groups influence your behavior? Do you follow the crowd, or do you find ways to be a nonconformist? Today we're going to take a look at conformity, obedience, and the power of groups to see how social situations impact our behavior, both in good ways and sometimes maybe not so good. But if we can be aware of them, we can at least see the ways that they can benefit us and things that we should look out for in case we run into any kind of trouble in groups. So let's start today by taking a look at the power of the situation, because social psychology is often going to take a look at the ways that we feel we should act based on what other people are doing. These are often referred to as those social norms, those expectations, or sometimes implicit, sometimes explicit rules that we think that we need to follow to be a member of a specific group. And the reason why we follow them can come down to a variety of reasons. This is part of the social influence theory that explains how we are influenced in social situations. Sometimes we are influenced by what's known as normative social influence, where we conform to a group and group behavior because we want to be accepted by the group. Because whatever they are doing, we feel like we should also do the same thing in order to gain their approval. We might not necessarily agree with the group, but we'll still follow along with them. We might also conform for informational reasons. Informational social influence is when we conform because we actually believe that the group is correct. Oftentimes we see this when a group is unanimous and you're the only person that is not going along with the group. You might feel that the group is actually correct in this situation. You change your beliefs or your reality to fit with what the group is saying. This can be a really useful technique in the case of persuasion. Persuasion techniques that we might see in things like business and marketing often come from a social psychology background. Because if we are trying to convince somebody to buy a product or change a behavior, we can employ different techniques in order to do so successfully. The elaboration likelihood model looks at this from two perspectives, two different paths that we can take to try and convince somebody to do what we'd like them to do, or let's say buy a product. We can use either the central route or the peripheral route of persuasion. The central route is more direct. It's using facts and logic in order to persuade someone. The peripheral route is less direct. Instead, you might use things like appeal and emotion in order to get somebody to support an idea or buy a product. Think about how commercials sometimes use celebrities or sometimes they use humor to try and create a positive association with a product. So when you're looking to buy something at the store, you'd be more likely to buy that than something that you haven't seen before. It's also where mere exposure effect might come back into play. Some other social psych persuasion techniques that can be used are things like the halo effect, and that's all about a good first impression. What the halo effect has found through research is that when someone does have a positive first impression, it will lead someone to also make other conclusions about a person's personality or character, even when they don't have information about it. So for example, if the first interaction they have is, they are nice, they might also then conclude they are smart and they are generous, even if they don't have evidence that that is actually true. You can also try two different approaches when it comes to persuading someone, called the foot in the door technique or the door in the face technique. The foot in the door technique is really useful for working up to a large request. If you start small with something that seems easy and manageable, you're more likely to convince someone to a larger request down the road. A lot of companies and businesses will do this with, say, no money down offer, or the first month is free, or the first month is less money, and then once you've already bought in, then you'll be hit with the larger fees later on. Another technique you can use that is sort of the opposite is door in the face. If you only need one thing, you might start with a request that seems completely unreasonable, something too big that you know they're going to say no to. It's the idea of that door slamming in your face. But then you come back with your real request, the thing that you actually want, that is less than your unreasonable request, and it makes it now seem all that more reasonable. So now a person might be more likely to say yes to it. So these are some different things that we can do to try and persuade people. And when we get a whole bunch of people doing the exact same thing, that's where conformity comes into play. Conforming is adjusting our behavior to coincide with the group standard. There are a lot of different factors that play a role in conformity. Typically, if the group is 3 or more people, if it's unanimous, and if we admire the group in some way, such as their status, we are more likely to conform. Obedience is something else that we often see in our society. Obedience to authority is often a social norm that we tend to follow. When someone is in an authority position, whether real or perceived, we're more likely to comply with their demands. Now, of course, that does apply to things like cultural norms and expectations of our society, and that is going to play a role in conformity as well. For example, a society that is more individualistic might be more likely to be nonconformist and not necessarily go along with the group as much as a society that is a collectivist society. If they place the needs of the group ahead of the individual, we might see more conformity and more obedience take place within those groups than individualistic societies. It's one of the benefits, actually, of multiculturalism. By having exposure to these different approaches and different techniques when it comes to cultural norms and expectations, we can see a wide variety to approaching groups in ways that can both be helpful and harmful to us. Because sometimes being a member of a group can be helpful, and sometimes it can be to our detriment. Group polarization, for example, is what happens when like-minded individuals come together to discuss their attitudes and opinions. They often walk away with their opinions being strengthened. Now, this can, of course, be a detriment if we only engage with people who we already agree with. Sometimes we see this throughout society as groups become more and more polarized or against each other because they don't engage with each other and only with members of their same group. Groupthink is another way that groups might be harmful. If we are looking for harmony in a group, we might go along with the group instead of offering alternatives or thinking critically about the decisions that are being made that can lead to key details being overlooked. And social loafing can happen in groups, where members exert less effort than if they were working alone. We often think of social loafing when looking at group projects in school, where group members might not put forth as much effort, maybe leaving one person to do it all, or where everyone in the group is just simply doing less work than if they had to give a presentation, say, on their own. And de-individuation, or the loss of individuality that happens as a result of being a part of a group. When you are in a very large crowd, for example, when emotions are heightened and there's a sense of arousal, it can lead people to behave in ways that they normally wouldn't. This could be as simple as dancing in a way in a crowd that you wouldn't if you were the only person who was dancing. Or we can think of mob behavior, like after a sports team loses and people are very upset in that crowd, they might start doing things like pushing people, lashing out, flipping cars, and engaging in other behaviors we wouldn't normally see from that person as an individual. Now, groups are not all bad, though. There are some ways that groups can be helpful for us. Social facilitation, for example, if there's something that's either very easy or well learned for us when other people are watching, like a crowd at a sporting event, it can actually enhance performance and people can perform better. Now, if the task is difficult or not well learned, then that presence of a crowd can, of course, cause anxiety and make performance decrease. And there is the false consensus effect, where we think that other people agree with us more than they actually do. So just because you have an opinion about something doesn't necessarily mean that everybody else thinks the same way that you do. When it comes to helping others, groups also play a role in this as well. Whether you agree or disagree with other people, the goal of helping others can be a benefit. These are referred to as superordinate goals. People can set aside their differences to help others when cooperation is required. However, it's important to be aware of social traps. This is when people seek immediate rewards that end up having long-term consequences. So doing something that is helpful for us right now, but isn't necessarily helpful for us down the road, that's referred to as a social trap. Looking at group behavior and looking at helping can be really beneficial when it comes to looking at businesses and workplace productivity. Industrial organizational psychologists, for example, might study social psychology in order to help businesses perform more optimally. We might look at things like burnout to see where people are becoming exhausted from their jobs and see if we can find ways to improve that, to improve the overall outcome of the company. Now, the reasons why people help are varied and diverse, but here are just a couple of different reasons why. One could be altruism. Some people might just have unselfish regard for the welfare of others. They help others just out of the goodness of their heart. Now, some psychologists might disagree that altruism can exist. They might say that we always get something, at least good feelings, out of helping others. But from a pure definition standpoint, altruism would be doing something when you get nothing in return. And of course, helping is a good thing. It's referred to as a pro-social behavior because it benefits others and society, and it's something that we want to see. We might feel a need to help because of a social debt, because we feel like we have benefited in some way and we feel the need to repay those debts. It may be more of a social reciprocity. You helped me, so now I feel like I should help you, in more specific situations where we're helping an individual. Or it could be social responsibility. Even though we're really not going to get anything in return, we might feel an obligation to help those who are in some way worse off than we are. But people don't always help, and there's a variety of reasons for that as well. Sometimes it's because of what's known as the bystander effect. When other people are present, we are less likely to help in an emergency situation, because the presence of other people means that we are conforming to people standing around and watching, and we're expecting somebody else to get involved and do something. There's also situational variables that can influence the behavior, whether we think it's safe for us to help at that point in time, or attentional variables. How well we notice the situation and really interpret it as an emergency can play a role in our ability to help as well. And that presence of multiple people is referred to as the diffusion of responsibility, because we feel less responsible when other people are present as opposed to when we're by ourselves. If we're the only person around and think no one else can help but me, we're more likely to get involved than if those other people were actually present. So sometimes being a part of a group can be good, and sometimes it can get in the way for us. But there's no denying that groups are going to have an influence on who we are and how we think and act. So thank you so much for watching, and as always, remember, be kind to your mind.